Hi, I'm Mark Sloboda, and this is The Real Politique. Today, I'm going to show you how a frog is incrementally boiled alive without being aware of it. But in this case, the frog is the American people. The pot is the conflict in Ukraine. The Biden admin is the one cranking up the heat. The flame is direct U.S. military involvement. And the end recipe is open war with Russia, potentially leading to World War III. On December 8th, 2021, Biden promised the American people and the world that there would be no boots on the ground in Ukraine. The idea that the United States is going to unilaterally use force to confront Russia invading Ukraine is not in the cards right now. And that is not on the table. February 11th, 2022, Biden admits that's a world war when Americans and Russia start shooting at one another. On February 14th, the U.S. supposedly withdraws all remaining U.S. troops from Ukraine. On February 23rd, the Pentagon vehemently tells us that U.S. troops will not become involved in Ukraine. Absolutely not, a Pentagon official said. No one wants to risk nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine. On March 1st, Biden declared during the State of the Union address, "Let me be clear. Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Thousands more U.S. troops are being deployed to Europe. Not to fight in Ukraine, we are told, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries, including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia." March 25th. In what is brushed off by his handlers and the media as just another patented Biden gaffe, Biden tells U.S. troops in Poland about the conflict just across the border in Ukraine, saying, "You're going to see when you're there, and some of you have been there. You're gonna see." On May 6th, sources tell Forbes that American military trainers are now already back on the ground in Ukraine. June 25th, U.S. and European officials revealed to the New York Times that dozens of CIA operatives, U.S. Special Forces, and commandos from several European countries are on the ground in Ukraine, advising, providing intelligence, directing Ukrainian proxy forces' actions by satellite-linked battlefield tablets, and directing the flow of weapons to the front, we're told. June 27th, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announces that 300,000 NATO troops in Europe are to be put on high readiness alert in response to the Russian threat. September 1st, it is publicly revealed that the Pentagon is planning and wargaming out the Kiev regime's counteroffensives. September 29th, the Pentagon sets up a new military command in Germany to oversee and manage U.S. support for the conflict in Ukraine. October 5th, anonymous U.S. intelligence officials revealed to The Intercept growing clandestine American operations inside Ukraine. There is a much larger presence of both CIA and U.S. Special Operations personnel and resources in Ukraine than there were at the time of the Russian invasion in February. Secret U.S. operations inside Ukraine are being conducted under a presidential covert action finding. By mid-October, the Polish foreign minister, EU High Foreign Policy muckety-muck Joseph Borrell, former CIA director and General David Petraeus, and other Western officials have all spoken of escalating extremist situations where NATO military forces would cross the border into Ukraine and supposedly annihilate the Russian military with overwhelming conventional force. U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, tells us that the rules-based world order, i.e. U.S.-led Western global hegemony, is at stake in Ukraine. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg declares that a Russian victory would be a defeat for NATO. Ukraine must prevail, and NATO must be prepared for a long, costly war in Ukraine, he says. October 21st, CBS reporters interview the commanders of the 101st Airborne Division, thousands of U.S. light infantry stationed just across the Ukrainian border in Romania, who say they are there not on a peacetime, but a combat deployment, and that they are prepared to cross the border into Ukraine to fight Russian forces on a moment's notice. CBS hints that they could be sent into nearby Odessa, Ukraine, to serve as a human tripwire force, to deny a Russian move to take the vital port city on the Black Sea. October 29th, the Russian Ministry of Defense accuses British Navy personnel on the ground in Ukraine of preparing and directing a Kiev regime air and naval drone attack on the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, and the very same British Navy unit of earlier carrying out the bombing of the Russian-German Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines. British documents leaked to the Grey Zone later reveal British military intelligence is organizing Kiev regime sabotage and terror operations in Crimea. U.S. General David Petraeus publicly calls for a U.S.-led coalition of the willing, essentially meaning the UK, Poland, Romania, and the Baltics, to directly militarily intervene in Ukraine. U.S. Colonel Douglas Macgregor responds on the American Conservative, a warning of this obvious disastrous creep towards war with Russia. October 31st. The boots are now officially on the ground. A senior U.S. defense official admits to the Washington Post that an unspecified number of uniformed active-duty U.S. military troops are on the ground in Ukraine, supposedly inspecting U.S. weapons cages. Inspecting weapons in a war zone. Sure they are. We've all heard this training and advising bullshit before in Syria, in Vietnam. We all know where this is going and how this ends. It's called mission creep. You are being desensitized incrementally through the media to direct U.S. military involvement and war with Russia in Ukraine. So, thousands of Western mercenaries, CIA, U.S. Special Forces, European commandos, and now uniformed active-duty U.S. military troops are all on the ground in Ukraine, involved in the conflict, supporting the Kiev Putsch regime, all presumably wearing boots. What happens when some American boys and girls in uniform are inevitably caught up in the conflict in the war zone, killed by Russian troops, and returned to Dover Air Force Base in flag-draped coffins? How many have already been killed and their corpses repatriated in secrecy under the cover of night? Or vice versa, when Russian boys and girls in uniform are killed by active-duty U.S. troops in Ukraine? Tell me, is there any way that this does not end in World War III?